Good morning. How is everybody doing this morning? Good. Santa Monica, California is a coastal city just west of downtown Los Angeles. I'm told that the view of the ocean from Santa Monica is breathtaking. The city of Santa Monica is named after a lady by the name of Saint Monica. If you are not from a Roman Catholic background, this name may not ring a bell to you, but a name that you may know is the name of Saint Augustine, or Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo. He was a very important Christian theologian, a Christian leader in the 4th century. That's a long, long time ago. But even today, Bible commentaries and seminary classrooms are filled with conversations about Augustine and what he wrote and what he said at a very turbulent time. Augustine helped to solidify some very important things in the Christian faith, some very foundational teachings, one of which was the concept of original sin, that we all are born in need of a Savior, that we all stand in need of a Savior. St. Augustine is a name that many of us may be familiar with from study, but I want to start this morning by sharing a story from St. Augustine that's a little bit less well known. It's the story of his mother. His mother is St. Monica. So St. Augustine's mother is Monica. The story is that Monica was married to a gentleman who was not very good to her. He's a pagan husband, non-believer, did not believe in Jesus Christ. And so not that he just hadn't heard the gospel, but he actively rejected the gospel. He actively rejected Christ. He did not believe. And the story goes from Augustine's writings after he became a Christian that Monica's husband was actually a pretty difficult person to live with. He had an explosive temper. He ran around. He lived an immoral lifestyle. And as you can imagine, for a devoted Christian woman, this was very difficult for her. To try to figure out, how do I be a wife? How do I be a faithful believer? How do I be a faithful mother when my husband is a difficult person to live with? And Monica also saw her children, 3, one of which was Augustine, living a rebellious lifestyle. Augustine, into his early to mid-years, lived a rebellious life. And so he was very immoral, slept around, he did whatever he wanted to do before he became a believer. And so, as you can also imagine, for Monica as a devoted believer, she was heartbroken over her husband and over her son. She wanted them to know Jesus Christ and the freedom and the life that they could have in Christ. And so the story goes that what Monica's response was to live a devoted life, faithful to her family. The story goes that Monica would stay up late at night weeping and crying for her husband and for her son to come to Christ, to receive salvation. The story goes that she would weep and pray late at night. So this morning I wonder, as we talk about and think about faithful women, if any of you have a woman in your life that has been something like this. Maybe a mother, maybe a grandmother, maybe a sister or a cousin, maybe it's a Sunday school teacher or an elementary school teacher or a band teacher or whatever. I wonder if you have any person that comes to mind, any woman that comes to mind that had great spiritual influence in your life. Not just by the words that they spoke, but by the lifestyle of their walk with Christ that shouted loudly about the faith in Jesus Christ. A couple that come to mind for me are my wife, Lauren. If you've met my wife, Lauren, you know that she is a loyal, absolutely loyal friend. She will do anything for you. When I first met Lauren, one of the first things that stuck out to me so much was her attitude of gentleness. She carried herself with this attitude of gentleness and quietness, not a weakness. It was a strong and enduring just a loyal friendship. And I saw her be a loyal friend. I first met Lauren, the story goes, that she wore sweatpants. So the first times in our first encounters, she was always wearing sweatpants. And so she was very comfortable just in a college environment, just wearing sweatpants to school and all this other stuff. And she wasn't very concerned about, making herself dress up and impressing anybody. And that's something that really stuck out to me, that I could see her beauty. I could see a lot of the characteristics that were so great, that shined out from her even though she wasn't dressed up, even though she didn't have makeup on. And those are some of the things that have influenced me, and Lauren has influenced my life in a very strong way. I also think about my sister, Rachel. When I was in junior high, I had accepted Christ. I had been baptized, and I went to youth group. But what was very difficult for me is to live boldly for my faith. Right? It's hard sometimes as a young student to be different from your peers, and I found that to be difficult. I was very concerned about what people thought of me. I was very concerned that other people didn't think I was a Bible thumper, didn't think I was a crazy person. I just wanted to fit in. That's a lot of students are just trying to fit in, right? And so that was me. And so what was very impressive to me was the example that my sister set. She led a Bible study in our school in the mornings, and a few people went to it. She got made fun of for it, and she was one of the few students that showed up at Stew at the Pole, in September, and she was always talking to my brothers and I about making sure that we got to youth group, and she was just very open about her faith. Was she perfect? No, but she was a strong spiritual influence on my life. I've been in this church for 2 months and I can tell you that we have deacons and we have men who are leading, doing amazing things, but I can tell you that there are some strong and capable and beautiful women behind the scenes that are doing some things that not many people know about, right? There are women who are here cooking on Wednesdays. There are women who spent months and months planning and executing vacation Bible school. And there are women in here that show up early and they stay late, and nobody knows their names, right? Nobody knows the extent of their service. And those things are beautiful things. And so we think about faithful women, we could think about them. We could also think about some women from our Christian history, right? So we think about Mary Magdalene, who was praised for her faith in the New Testament. Mary Magdalene was the first person after Jesus was resurrected to be commissioned to go and tell of the resurrection. So we also think about, in our Baptist heritage, persons like Annie Armstrong, Lottie Moon, who were Baptist missionary pioneers, who we hold missionary offerings, right, that support missions in their name, because these women held great spiritual significance. So think about St. Monica, and her life of faith shines for Christ. Me and my life, my wife Lauren and my sister Rachel, their life of faith shines for Christ. The women in our church who serve selflessly with humility day in and day out, their life of faith shines for Christ. These women, Mary Magdalene, Annie Armstrong, Lottie Moon, their life of faith shines for Christ. Today we're continuing our series called It Is Well. My name is Pastor John. If we haven't met, I'm the student pastor here. And so Pastor Josh is on vacation, spending some time with his family, and just being a father, being a husband. And so he'll be back with us next week. He'll be back tomorrow, but he'll be back with us in church next week. But I'm excited to continue our series. We've been going through 1 Peter and understanding what the applications of this passage are. And a big thrust of the book of 1 Peter is peace in the valley, as Pastor Josh put it. And so we're going to continue today by looking at how our relationships as believers are opportunities to shine for Christ. So whether we're married, whether we're single, whether we're students, we're young people that are just entering into the dating world, whether we are divorced, remarried, that all of our relationships in life are opportunities to shine for Christ. One of the things that really impressed me when I first got to church here was the emphasis and the focus on missions and evangelism right here. So, we have Matthew 28 that says, that commissions us as a church to proclaim the gospel, and I'm so pleased that our church, sees that and understands that and owns that commission. And so our vision, our mission here as a church is to love the Lord, live the life, and lead the lost. And so a big part of our identity, a big part of what we do here as a church is to love the Lord, live the life, and lead the lost. So sharing the gospel is a part of our DNA. As Christians, and especially as a church, as First Baptist Church of Lavernia, is to share the gospel. So what we're talking about today, though, is really focusing on the second one, living the life, right? So oftentimes we think about sharing the gospel and we think about, we got to hand out a tract, right? we got to get a preacher, we got to get a revival going to share the gospel, right? And those are all good things. I'm glad that our church is doing that. But today we're going to talk about that our words plus our actions equal our witness. So not just what we say, but also what we do equals our witness. So yes, we need to be trained in evangelism. We need to know how to share our testimony with others. We need to know how to share the gospel with others. But also, if our lives don't measure up with what we're saying, then our witness is questionable. So it matters what we do and what we say. All of those equal our witness. Our words plus our actions equal our witness. So our text is 1 Peter chapter 3, 1-7. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. This passage is called a household code because it deals with the primary relationship between a husband and a wife in the church. So this is addressed to Christians, husbands and wives, to explain to them how a Christian marriage should look. There's 5 of these passages in the New Testament. First one is here, 1 Peter chapter 3. Also Ephesians chapter 5, Colossians chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 2, and Titus chapter 2. They're all a little bit different, but they're all essentially saying the same thing. And all of them address the primary relationships of a husband and a wife and how those should look. Now, I want to be fully transparent with you that there are some who simply do not like this passage. Some that think this is outdated, okay, this needs to be reinterpreted, ignored, ripped out of the Bible, forgot about, or misunderstood in a different kind of way or something. Women are weaker vessels. Wives, submit to your husbands. What is this, 1850 all over again, right? But the reality is, if we remember 2 Timothy 3:16, that all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. In other words, all of Scripture, even the difficult passages to understand on the surface, have meaning and purpose in our lives. They're meant to build us up in our faith and to help us to walk with Christ closer. So, in order to understand what this passage means, we'll look at a little bit of context. So, the first thing is that there's a problem. Houston, we have a problem. So, there's a problem in the first century. Imagine that relationships between husbands and wives was a little bit different than it is today. So if a husband was to hear the gospel preached, to accept the gospel, his wife would probably be sitting there with him, and they would probably accept Christ together. Or if not, he would hear the gospel, and he would accept Christ, and it would be the natural run of things for him to lead his wife and his children into the church, right? That would be the natural run of things. But imagine if you are a wife. Somehow you've heard the gospel. Somehow you've been exposed to the truth of Jesus Christ. You've been convicted in your spirit. You have given your life to Christ. You have received salvation, but your husband has not. It's not just that these husbands haven't heard the gospel yet, and they haven't had an opportunity to respond to Christ. The passage says in verse 1, even if some, that's the husbands, do not obey the word, they may be won without a word. So this Greek term for word is logos. So if some do not obey Jesus or the word about Jesus, so in other words, if they've heard the message of Jesus, if they've heard the message preached, if they've heard the gospel and they haven't received it, if they've rejected it, they've said, no, I don't want any part of it, then what are the wives to do? And this is the problem that these women are dealing with. These devoted new believers are questioning, what am I supposed to do? I'm devoted to Christ. I'm devoted to this new faith. I'm fully convinced, and so I'm here. But what do I do about my family? My husband He rejects it. He doesn't believe, and what am I supposed to do? This could be a dangerous situation for a woman, actually, possibly. Depending on how strict the husband was, he could see it as an undermining of his authority, an undermining of his faith in the time. And so the woman actually was making a very bold decision when she accepted Christ apart from her husband. This problem appears to be a fairly large problem in the early church because Paul addresses the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and he addresses this same problem. And so imagine that this problem is something that Paul is writing to the Corinthians about. Peter's writing in a general letter to everybody in the church everywhere, and they're addressing this sort of question that these women are having. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7:13, if any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. So then what are the women to do? And this is what Peter says. So if some do not obey the word, if some do not obey Jesus or the word about Jesus, they've heard the gospel and they said, no, I don't want it, then Peter's answer is, may they be won without a word. May they be won not with preaching and arguing and apologetics, but may they be won by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. So if a sermon hasn't done it, is arguing or fighting or demeaning your husband or trying to prove the sufficiency of Christ, is that going to convince them? Peter doesn't think so. He thinks that the one thing that may convince them is the pure and holy conduct of their lives, their behavior, their lifestyle of devotion and faithfulness. He's saying hopefully that will convince them of the gospel that they've already heard, right? So their relationships, these women who are in this situation, their relationships were opportunities to shine for Christ. That's what Peter thinks. So what is a bit scandalous about this passage is that the whole thrust of it is missional. We have to understand that the whole, the questions that these women are asking and the answer that Peter is giving, the foundation of it is missions. The concern of it is missions. The primary concern is that the gospel is proclaimed. I think for us, it's easy for us to understand that, well, Vacation Bible School, of course, that's about the gospel. Revivals, when we have a preacher come in and invite the people to hear the gospel, and we have a band, that's about the gospel. When we have Disciple Now and youth camp for the students, that's about the gospel, right? We tend to understand that Sunday mornings are about the gospel, about people hearing the gospel proclaimed. We understand that. When we support missions, when we send missionaries to India and to China, and we support missions financially through our offerings and through our partnerships with the Southern Baptist Convention, with the BGCT, those things are about the gospel, right? But how often do we recognize that our marriages are about the gospel? The way that we relate to our husbands and our wives, to our fathers and to our mothers, and to our brothers and our sisters, that's about the gospel. That people don't just care about what we say, that people are looking at what we do. So the question is, do our words match up with what we do? So yes, it matters. We need to be trained in evangelism to share the gospel, but does what we do Monday through Saturday confirm or negate the gospel that we say on Sunday mornings, that we believe? So our relationships in life as believers are opportunities to shine for Christ, just as these women's relationship with their husbands are opportunities to shine for Christ. See, the church exists to point others to Christ, but so does our individual lives. Just as our mission as a church is to love the Lord, live the life, and lead the lost, so our personal relationships are opportunities for us to be on mission with what we say, but also with what we do. Psalms 1:1-3 says it this way. It says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by the water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and all that he does, he prospers." You think about a tree in your neighborhood, the biggest tree on the block, right? And that thing that shines, right? It's big and green, and it says to everybody, "Look at me," right? Everybody can't help but see that big tree that stands out from all the other trees. Matthew 5:14-16 puts it this way. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Steve Maraboli puts it this way. He says, you can speak with spiritual eloquence, pray in public, and maintain a holy appearance, but it is your behavior that will reveal your true character. And think about it. Do you really care what a preacher has to say if his character is questionable? Probably not. So what he says is important, but also what he does is important, right? It all adds up to his witness. Our words plus our actions equal our witness. So Titus 1:16 talks about this problem of the difference between our words and our action that sometimes exists. He says that some profess to know God, but they deny him by their actions. Confessional pastor by the name of Brennan Manning, he said this: the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. So we have to understand that our relationships are opportunities to shine for Christ. And our relationships, our marriages, that's where missions needs to begin. We can support missions all we want to. We can teach a Sunday school class all we want to. We can support VBS, and we can, support by putting money in the offering plate. And we need to do all of those things. But the question is, do your lifestyle, does your marriage, does your relationships confirm what you say you believe, or does it negate what you say that you believe? So the first thing is that we need to be together for a different reason. So husbands and wives, we need to be together for a different reason. Because our relationships are opportunities to shine for Christ. So I watched this movie a few weeks ago, and I'm almost embarrassed to say that I watched it because it's a chick flick, and it's like a few years old already, and it was just terrible. I mean, it was rough. So to give you some backstory, Lauren and I have been living sort of out of boxes for the last 2 months before we bought our house, and we just moved in. But we haven't had internet for like 2 or 3 months. So we have approximately 3.5 DVDs in our house, and we have a 9.5-inch screen TV. So that's what we've been watching TV on every night. So we've just been watching these 3.5 movies over and over again every night, and they've been starting to get a little bit boring. So one of these movies that we have is called He's Just Not That Into You. And so, yep, you know what I'm talking about, right? So imagine me laying on the couch, watching this movie, and just wishing that I could go to the movie theater or something. I mean, it's just like rough. Anyways, if you haven't seen this movie, it's a romantic sort of movie, comedy almost, about the drama and the saga of, about 4 or 5 different romantic relationships. One of the relationships is between Bradley Cooper. He's acting as a character. Anyway, so Bradley Cooper is married to this woman, and they've been married for a little while. They're college sweethearts, and they're hitting a period in their relationship where they're getting a little bit bored with each other. And so that shows the next scene that Bradley Cooper's in the supermarket, and he runs into this beautiful woman, and they start flirting, and flirting turns into exchanging phone numbers, and exchanging phone numbers, see where I'm going with this, turns into, meeting up with each other on accident, and meeting up with each other on accident turns into a full-fledged marital affair. And so, in a way, this this story of their relationship and that encounter is pretty indicative of extramarital affairs that that we have seen, unfortunately, unfold before us. But what was very troubling to me is not just this whole situation that had happened, but the way that they depicted that situation was that if it wasn't the wife's fault for making that extramarital affair happen, it was at least partly her fault because she was becoming overbearing and boring, and she just had lost her fire from college. And so how could she expect the husband to do anything else but to cheat on his wife? Because it's her fault, right? Because she didn't fulfill her duty anymore. How messed up is that, right? So I think actually it's pretty easy to begin coming up with those excuses if we think to ourselves that, my marriage is about me. My marriage exists to fulfill me, to make me happy, to keep me going, to keep my tank full. And therefore, when my wife ceases to fill my tank and to fulfill me and to make me happy, then guess what? I can put my wife aside. I can forget my covenant because my marriage has ceased to fulfill its purpose. It's pretty easy to come up with those excuses if we view our marriages as being primarily about ourselves. But biblical marriage is not that. Biblical marriage is about serving one another. Biblical marriage is about the husband caring for his wife, serving his wife, putting her needs before his own, and the wife doing the same thing, serving the husband, putting his needs before her own, thinking about each other, because that's the example that we have in Christ. And so I wonder if we could begin to shift our mindset from thinking about ourselves, what we're receiving, what our spouse is doing for us, and what our spouse isn't doing for us, how they're not fulfilling us, how they're not doing what we want them to do, how they're not fulfilling their purpose in our lives. And we started shifting our thinking to look at them and say, I wonder what they need. I wonder what they need me to do for them. I wonder what kind of husband or what kind of wife that they really need me to be for them right now. I wonder what things they need to be encouraged in. I wonder what ways they need to be challenged. I wonder what they need from me. What are the ways that I could serve them? And if we could shift our mindset, I think it would really allow us to understand that our relationships really are opportunities to shine for Christ. So the second thing, if we look at wives, what the scripture says about wives. It says, likewise, homios in the Greek, wives, gine, be subject to your own husbands. In other words, likewise means, hey, we should probably look before this and see, what he's talking about. So likewise brings us all the way back to chapter 2, verse 13, where we're told to be subject to the governing authorities. God has put them in place. We're supposed to put ourselves under their authority and follow what they would have us to do, right? And so in the same way, wives are to be subject to their own husbands, right? So oftentimes, I understand that to tell a wife that, hey, be subject to your husband, in today's world is kind of like, that's funny. Right? I mean, being subject, telling you to submit to your husband is like, okay, I'm just either going to ignore that or pretend you didn't say it, right? Right? But remember that I want to tell you that being subject is not a bad thing. It's not an oppressive thing. It's not something meant to push you down. If we look at the example of Jesus, remember that Jesus submitted himself to the Father's will. Do we remember that? That in Matthew 26:39, he says, Jesus praying to the Father, he says, my Father, if it would be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. John 6:38, Jesus says that I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. Now we believe that Jesus is fully God. He was with God at creation. When creation was spoken into being, Jesus was with God the Father. Jesus' rightful place is with God on his throne in heaven. So Jesus is fully God, 100% God. So Jesus is in no way inferior to the Father, and yet Jesus submitted himself to the Father. And so we have to understand that this command to be subject to your husbands, to put yourself under the husband, is not meant to be an oppressive thing. It's not meant to push you down. It's not meant to say that you're a lesser being or a lesser person. We're saying, look, the same way that Christ acted, act like that. So it continues, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of your hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. So some have rendered this passage and said, well, okay, this means that girls can't wear makeup, can't do their hair, can't buy a nice dress, can't go out shopping, and that's pretty crazy. That's not what this passage is saying. It's saying, again, remember that if women, in this passage what they're dealing with is an unbelieving husband, the point is that, look, if you're just trying to dress yourself up, they're going to see past that. That's not going to convince them. They know what's on the inside, right? They know you better than probably any other person. Your husband, your wife, knows you better than any other person. That's a good thing. That's also a bad thing, right? So they know you. So no amount of makeup or doing your hair or putting on a nice dress is going to fool them. If you want to convince them of the truth of the gospel, if you want to shine as a light for Christ, you have to cultivate this inner character, right? And he describes it as gentle and a quiet spirit. Now, again, another pushback that I might hear about this passage is, well, you tell me to cultivate a gentle and quiet spirit. What you're really telling me to do is be a floor mat, right? This is not something that I want to do. I don't want to be quiet and gentle and have a quiet and gentle spirit. I want to be loud and proud. I want people to know that I'm competent, right? I want to let people know that I, as a woman, can do the same things as a man can do. But let me tell you that this, again, is telling you to look back at the example of Christ. It's not telling you to be a floor mat. Again, this passage saying to cultivate a gentle and quiet spirit is a good thing. It's saying to put on the character of Christ. The Greek term for the word gentle shows up 4 times in the New Testament. Once here, describing to the women to, hey, put on this character of gentleness and quietness. The other times are talking about it in a very good way. The word is praus. So, the word praus shows up in Matthew 5:5, the Beatitudes. Blessed are you when fill in the blank. So in Matthew 5:5, it says, blessed are the meek or the gentle, the praus, same Greek word, for they shall inherit the earth. So it's a good thing to have this character of gentleness, of meekness. It's a character that will receive blessing from the Lord. Matthew 11:28 and 29, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Why? For I am gentle. Same word, praus. For I am gentle and lowly in heart. The 4th time that this word shows up in the New Testament is when Jesus rides into Jerusalem on the donkey before he's to be crucified. It describes Jesus riding into Jerusalem as one who is gentle, praus, the same word. And so women, this is not about being oppressive. It's not about putting you down or saying, be less than. This is saying Jesus has these same characteristics, and he's saying that any person is absolutely blessed to cultivate this sort of attitude and this sort of character. And so you're honored to follow Christ and follow his example and the way that he has lived and the way that he would have you to live. This is an invitation, right? So one commentary puts it this way. It says, biblical gentleness or meekness, praus, that Greek word, is not weakness, but rather refers to exercising God's strength under his control. Or in other words, demonstrating power with undue harshness. So wives, I wonder if you recognize that your relationships really are opportunities for you to shine for Christ. Whatever they are, if you're married, if you are not married, if you're divorced or widowed, all of these, you have relationships in your life, and they're all opportunities for you to shine for Christ. But I want to ask you a question. Are you fighting to win a battle, or are you fighting to serve so that others can see Christ in you? It continues, it says, for this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. So guys, what does it say to us? Likewise, homios, the same word that started the passage talking to women, right? So in other words, guys, we have commands too. We have commands to follow. We have an example of Christ to follow. And what are they? Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So, this phrase, weaker vessels, may be the only thing that you heard from that whole passage, right? Thinking, you're going to call me a weaker vessel? What the heck does that mean? That's pretty rude. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm pretty strong, pretty competent, pretty capable, right, as a woman. What I want to tell you is that some passages render this word not vessel, but partner. The woman as a weaker partner. I do not like that translation because the word actually is vessel. It's the same word to describe the vessel. When Jesus says you don't light a lamp and put it under a bushel, put it under a vessel, same word. So what we're trying to conjure up is this image of a precious vessel, right? And so the idea that a husband, consider your wives as this fragile, beautiful, and precious vessel. And so the idea that, hey, it's something worthy. Your wife is something absolutely worthy of receiving great care and attention. When Lauren and I moved from our rental property to the place that we own now, just a few weeks ago, we packed all our boxes, and we were preparing for people from the church to come and help us move, which we greatly appreciate. And so we packed up all the boxes, and we were prepared, so we were ready for everybody to come that next day, so that the only thing they had to do was just move boxes, right? So we had this one box in the back of our house, and it had pictures and fragiles in it. So it had all of our family pictures. It had, some other artwork that she found valuable. And that night before, we were talking about it the next day, and she said, hey, would you mind taking that box and putting it in the back of the truck? Because I don't want them to get broken, And so, not that she didn't trust people, but what she didn't know is if the people that were going to come the next day would recognize how precious and valuable those items were. And she didn't know if they were going to treat them with proper respect, if they were going to be treated with proper care. See, these items were things worthy of receiving great care and attention. And so we set them aside. We treated them with greater care, right? Think about it this way. If you buy a 2017 Ford F-150, the first thing you're going to do is probably not make it into a work truck, put dents in the side of it, throw your McDonald's trash on the back seat and let your milkshake, spill all over your console, right? You got to treat that puppy with some pride because, it's worth a lot of money. It's very precious to you. It's something you're going to take care of, right? I have this story. I also have a pair of white Nike tennis shoes that I bought. I paid like $60 for them. Can't believe I really paid $60 for a pair of tennis shoes, but they're pretty cool. Anyways, so they're white tennis shoes. As you can imagine, they're easy to get dirty. So I actually kept the box, and every time I'm done wearing them, it's going to sound a little weird. I've never done this before. But I take them off my feet, and I put them back in the box, and I wrap them in the paper, and I shut the box. So if I go to the gym, and I work out in my workout shoes, I take this box with me in the bottom of my duffel bag, and I carry it to the gym, and I take them out, and then I put them on, and then the night when I'm done wearing them, I don't put them on the shoe rack with the rest of the shoes. I put them back in the box, wrap them up, shut the box, put it aside, because I don't want them to get dirty, right? There's something worthy of, to me, greater value and greater attention. So this image in this passage of a weaker vessel isn't intended to minimize the women or the wives, because remember, it says for husbands to show honor to their wives, right? So this isn't a negative thing. Husbands, you are to show honor to your wives because your wives are something worthy of receiving great care and attention, right? And so, and also because after that it says they are heirs with you, meaning they are partners with you. They're on the same level as you because of what Jesus Christ did for you. Jesus is God and the rest of us are not. We're all equal on the same playing field. So this is a way of saying, husbands, treat your wives as someone worthy of receiving great care and attention. So guys, what is the example of Christ that we're supposed to follow in relating to our wives? I think it's this. It's servanthood. Think about this. Jesus, what example of leadership has he given us? Jesus came down. He left his rightful throne in heaven with God the Father. He came down to be born a lowly, humble birth in a manger. God the Father, think that the God of the universe, who was at creation, who spoke creation into being, left his throne in heaven because of love for us, because of our helpless estate. He came down and he lived a perfect life. He allowed himself to be misunderstood in certain points, and he gave his time and energy and attention to people that nobody else was willing to give it to. And the night before he was crucified, what did he do? He got down on his knees and he washed his disciples' feet. He took off his outer garment. The God of the universe, who was just about to die on a cross for something he never did, to die a death that he didn't deserve, he got down on his knees and he washed his disciples' feet. Let me tell you something. He got up from washing their feet, and what did he do? He allowed himself to be stretched out on a cross, to be crucified, tortured, and killed for you and for me because of love. Because of love. So, if Jesus has given us this example, guys, what right do we have to manipulate our wives? To treat them any differently than Christ has shown us to treat them? To try to control them and think that we're much better than them? What right do we have to do that? We have no right to do that. So guys, recognize that your relationships are opportunities to shine for Christ. But let me ask you a question. Are you fighting to win a battle, or are you fighting to serve so that you may shine for Christ? So some takeaways I hope that we can take with us. For married, we focused on married people, but I understand that not everybody in this room is married. There's people from all over the spectrum. There's people that are married, young and happy, and there's people that have been married for 10, 15 years, are hitting dry spots in their marriage. There are people that have been married and their spouse has been taken from them. They've been called home, and these people are missing their spouses, right? And there's people who have been divorced and or remarried, and there are students, there are young people who are in the dating world who are just entering into this dating process, and they're asking questions about, what does this mean for me? If a married couple can shine for Christ, what does it mean for me? Do I just have to wait till I get married until I can shine for Christ? No. So for married couples, I hope that you can take this with you. Missions has to begin in your marriage. So if you're a teacher, if you help with Vacation Bible School, if you're invested in the church, those things are all great. But let me ask you to invest in your marriage even much more. Because our missions, our evangelism, our display of our faith has to start with our marriage. It has to. It has to start with your marriage. Because your marriage has to reflect what you say on Sunday mornings. It has to. I had this mentor that I used to meet with every week, and he said to me, the best gift a parent can give their child is a love that is immovable. For them to show their child that without a shadow of a doubt that they love each other, gives them a sense of security, gives them a sense that of a model to follow after, right? So let me ask you, if you're married, to not spend as much time working, not spend as much time, thinking about what I can get for my kids, what I can get for my wife, and spend time investing in your marriage even more than those things. Because that marriage, that relationship is going to be a foundation that your kids can count on. It's going to be a foundation that's going to bear witness to Christ stronger than anything ever could. So let us see your love. Let us see your love. Don't hide it. Don't be sarcastic with each other in public and not allow us to see your love. Let us see your love. What about if you're widowed? Please share your story. I understand if however perfect or imperfect your relationship has been, we need to hear your story. If you have had that relationship and your spouse has been taken from you, let us hear your story. Young people who are entering into the dating world, married couples that are in the thick of it, young married couple, all of us, we need to hear your story. Let us hear your story. It's of great value. It's a legacy. What if you're divorced or remarried and you say to yourself, you know what, I've messed it up. I'm remarried, but I don't feel like I can really speak to this because I've been divorced. I messed it up. I mean, I can't say anything without being a hypocrite, right? Because I didn't do what I needed to do. I didn't have the kind of relationship that I needed to have. So thank you for reminding me of what I already know, right? But your relationship can also shine for Christ. So don't focus on the past, because the gospel is not about what you have done in the past. It's about whose you are, that you've been redeemed, and who you are becoming, because the Holy Spirit is sanctifying you. So your new family situation can be something that honors God. You just have to make it that. You have to make it that. There's a story of a guy in our church named Bob. He's given me permission to share this story. Bob spent a number of years being married to a woman that he eventually divorced. So Bob was in real estate, lived in California, and he was married to this woman for actually a lot of years. And finally, just due to different disputes, and especially struggling with alcohol, the relationship just began to crumble and fall apart, and eventually they divorced. And so Bob remains unmarried today. He's divorced. He goes to our church. But let me tell you, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a servant like Bob, one whose life reflects the gospel more than Bob. When Lord and I moved into our house, Bob showed up that night all by himself. He cooked us a meal. He brought over to his house. He sat down with us. He shared stories, and we listened to him. Man, can I tell you how blessed we were by him? When I tell you how ministered to that we felt by Bob and his story. It didn't matter that he was divorced, right? Because all of our relationships are opportunities for us to shine for Christ. Bob said that every morning when he wakes up, he prays something like this: God, show me what it is you'd have me to do today. Give me an opportunity to share your love with others, right? And so all of our opportunities, all of our relationships, even if we're divorced or remarried, are opportunities to shine for Christ. Singles, what if you're a student, or if you're somebody who hasn't married yet and you're in the dating world, or you're looking forward to being in the dating world? What does that mean for me? I'm not married, so I guess I just wait to shine for Christ until, I get married? No. You have relationships in your lives with your professors, with your parents, with your grandparents, with friends, people at church. All of these are opportunities for you to shine for Christ. You may never know the influence that you have on people. I worked at AutoZone going through college, and I drove a delivery van for a long time and had AM and FM radio in it. And I drove the van like 8 hours a day. It was terrible. Let me tell you, it was like just the worst. I'm a people person. I need to be out with people. And so I'm stuck in this van, listening to AM and FM radio, and I knew every channel that was going to be on, everything that was going to be playing on every channel throughout that whole situation because I listened to the radio so much. Anyway, so, one day this guy comes up to me as I'm in the store, and he's a fellow employee of mine, and he said, "Hey, I just want to thank you." I was like, "For what?" He's like, because, every time I get into the van after you drive it, it's on K-Love. And he said, I've been struggling with my faith, and I've needed to come back to the Lord, and it has helped me to kind of reconnect with Christ because it's been on K-Love, and I just began to just listen to it, And that's not to say anything about myself. It's just like you may never know the influence you may have on people in small ways like that. I didn't plan to do that. I just shut the truck off and had the radio on, right? I mean, that wasn't an intentional thing, but you may never know the influence you may have on people, especially as a single person. Students, I want to encourage you that you can honor your future spouse already today. You can do that in a couple of ways. You can do that by waiting for them. Right, you can do that already. You can honor your future spouse by waiting for them, saving yourself so that you can only be with your future spouse, so that your relationship can have value. You can already show great honor to that person you may not even know yet by saving yourself for them, by not giving yourself away to other people that don't deserve it, right? You're intended to wait, so wait for them. Another way that you can honor your future spouse is by cultivating a servant's heart already. You can cultivate a servant's heart. So in all of your relationships, asking yourself, man, how can I think about the other person? How can I consider what the other person needs? Instead of just letting your parents, give you orders all the time, maybe start thinking of, I wonder what my parent needs from me. I wonder what I can do to serve them. I wonder what I can do to go the extra mile to do something for them that might surprise them. All of our relationships as believers, all of them are opportunities to shine for Christ because our words plus our actions equal our witness. Towards the end of his life, Monica's husband received Christ. And in Augustine's writings, after he became a believer, he wrote stories extensively about his mother. And he said that it was her lifestyle, it was her behavior of gentleness, of devotion, her faithfulness was the sermon that convinced her husband about Christ. It was written that it was her weeping late at night for her husband's salvation, for her son's salvation, her staying up late at night praying for their salvation that eventually convinced him of the gospel that he had already